Welcome to the Connected Things 2021 Digital Conference. This one's all about 5G. This is an IoT event, and this year we're focused on how 5G adds to and improves Internet of Things. This panel is focused on connected cars, a special and complex case of Internet of Things, because you have a whole bunch of sensors and often more than one person together in a package moving around. And so the whole notion of IoT, which I like to think of as sense and remote control, has a lot more complexity and interest in it. So the core thing that we're going to go at is how and when will 5G affect or improve connected cars? And we've got three panelists today for you. We have Gabi Zijderveld from Affectiva, which soon will be part of Smart Eye. She'll tell you more about that. We have Caroline Chung from Veoneer, and we have John Pelliccio from Bose. Let me ask you all each to introduce a 1 minute or less about your company and the role at your company so people are oriented, and then we're going to dive in to our conversation. And let me start with you, Gabi.
Sure, thank you. So my name is Gabi Zijderveld, Chief Marketing Officer at Affectiva, also very much involved on the product strategy side of things. Affectiva is an AI company that spun out of MIT about 12 years ago. And in those years, we've developed very unique and category leading technology that's all about using computer vision and machine learning to understand humans, specifically analyze their facial expressions, their reactions, their behaviors in context. And we have been providing commercial products for a good number of years. And it was about 4 or 5 years ago that we started entering the automotive market, when a lot of the car manufacturers approached us asking, well, if you can understand human emotions, can you also understand what's going on with people in the car? So we pivoted to that. And just to add to that, Frank, you alluded to it. Just a few weeks ago, we announced that Smart Eye, a company that's been a market leader in eye tracking, also deployed in automotive, is acquiring Affectiva. And we're effectively merging the two companies. I'm going to be the Chief Marketing Officer over at Smart Eye. So exciting times and exciting stuff that we will build. And we'll talk more about that.
Yes, please. All right. Thanks, Gabi. Caroline, over to you.
Thanks, Frank. Congratulations, Gabi. I'm Caroline Chung, the Senior Business Development Manager at Veoneer. So we as Veoneer are very focused on improving safety in vehicles. Veoneer is a Swedish company. We make pretty much all the sensors associated with autonomous and semi-autonomous driving. And in my particular group, I do manage the feature development for interior sensing. So that would be driver monitoring and also occupant monitoring in the vehicles.
All right. How about you, John?
All right, Frank, thank you for having me today. Hello to everybody who's tuning in. My name is John Pelliccio. I'm the head of product communications for Bose's Automotive Systems Division. Not unlike Affectiva, Bose also got its start at MIT. Obviously, our founder, Dr. Bose, was a professor of acoustics there for many, many years. And since the inception of our Automotive Systems Division back in 1982, we have been designing experiences, primarily music listening experiences that are used inside vehicles. Currently, we're in more than 100 different vehicle nameplates, 27 different car makers worldwide. And like a lot of people in the industry right now, we're very actively engaged in understanding the emergence of connectivity, autonomy, sharing, and electrification. Those 4 big trends that are helping to shape the future of the industry, and excited about a new suite of experiences that go beyond music listening to be able to really touch any sound in any car at any time and sort of take control of the acoustic landscape that you listen to while you're driving. Driven very much by factors like 5G and connectivity that we'll be talking about today. So excited to be here.
Cool. All right, so let's quickly orient our audience before we dive into our 3 core topics. So, why should we even get excited about 5G? What does it do better than the existing technology, 4G LTE? So, brief discussion among the 3 of us. There seem to be 3 things that make it better. Although asterisk for the techies among you, as you know, there's 3 versions of 5G, and the benefits vary depending on which flavor you're using. We're not going to go deep into the details of that, but just know that it depends on what version of 5G is available to you and how those advance over time. The first benefit is lower latency. So when you make a request, responses arrive faster. So that just is the beginning, how fast it takes to get the start of your response. That's different than higher bandwidth, which is more data in the same amount of time. So you can get a movie crazy fast, as well as the start of the movie arrives crazy fast and the end of the movie arrives crazy fast. So that's the difference between latency and bandwidth. And then the last one that gets talked about less is greater density of endpoints. You can pack more 5G radios, phones, cars, whatever they are, in the same amount of space because the radios can handle more devices at the same time. So any quick thoughts or comments for our audience about those differences? We'll, of course, elaborate on the benefits in detail, but any quick highlights that you all want to pick out?
I'm happy to go first.
Sure.
Yeah, just an observation, and I think it actually applies for Veoneer and Bose as well, is that, of course, we're delivering the capabilities that we're going to be talking about today, right, regardless of 5G. But when we look at what 5G will enable is the amount of services and the complexity of the sensors and thus the data that goes on in a vehicle. I think delivering on that complexity and actually realizing kind of the more futuristic use cases within that, I think 5G will truly help us to accelerate that. So from my perspective, that's something I'm really excited about.
Okay.
Yeah,
the responsiveness definitely matters. So John, you're going to say something?
Yeah, just going to say that you said it yourself just then. Responsiveness matters. Low latency is better for everything. It improves communications, right? I know that the quality of phone call communications is something that gets criticized all the time in JD Power IQS scores and things like that. And then I think the other thing, we'll touch on it a little bit as we go through this exercise today, is just understanding how you can help the drivers and occupants of those cars manage all of the complexity that comes with all of that data. Right? Just because you can bombard people with information doesn't mean you should, especially while they're driving. And so there's a tremendous amount of work that needs to be done just to make sure that the driving experience is still a cohesive one and an easy to manage one, regardless of this newfound access to persistent connectivity and lots and lots of bandwidth.
I think my take on it, Frank, would be it depends. If trying to do onboard processing for safety applications where you can't rely on a reliable connection all the time, right? And it's very safety based. People's lives are counting on it. Then you probably want to do it on board the vehicle versus streaming up to the cloud. If John's going to talk about this a little bit more in this session, but if you're looking for more customization, convenience features, something to do with more infotainment, then definitely 5G will enable that. So I think it's a mix. What you're using it for matters.
Right, and I'll just note also that the early versions of AI, of course, the AI models required a round trip to the cloud to get the result of the model. But now we're seeing all this work on edge to put more and more of the models in the car, if you will, or close to the sensor and compute. So over time, the dependency on faraway services will evolve. I think there'll always be some for some circumstances. Just to note for our audience, part of what all of us are dealing with here is the fact that those capabilities, what can be put close to the experience, is changing over time. So
and Frank, I was just going to chime in on something you mentioned, which is actually really an interesting consideration in this all as well. And for us as an AI company, right, we use massive amounts of data and deep learning, and sure, at Veoneer and Bose, these considerations are equally important. Is that delivering that in a vehicle, especially around these safety capabilities, you cannot stream your loaded models to the cloud, right? So a big challenge in this industry is how do you actually shrink what are traditionally really heavy, large, deep learning-based models and get them to run on an embedded chipset where it has to share services others are providing, because of course, I'm not going to get a dedicated system on chip just for my stuff, right? So it's from a technical perspective hugely challenging, especially around and Veoneer spend a lot of time on that as well, right? Especially around the safety capabilities. But whereas safety, I think, Caroline, you would probably agree, it's always going to be table stakes and a priority in automotive. It's inevitable. I think there's still a lot of greenfield and a huge opportunity to deliver all those other experience services, right? And deliver more capabilities in a vehicle. And so 5G.
So let's fence off one area of complexity, because we've been leaning on connected cars and not mentioning autonomous and self-driving cars. There's clearly been a lot of rethinking about how fast we're going to actually get those, despite the claims of billionaires that they're always, a few months away. So we're setting that aside today, because the capabilities of 5G for connected cars enhance a lot of other things, and that's where we're going to focus today. Because the early versions of these sensing and capabilities are already in cars, and more are getting in the field. So as we talk, by the way, please comment about stuff that's already in the field or that's on the roadmap for the next year or two. So we're going to set aside that, and we want to focus on 3 topics. And so let's get set to dive into those. First one is safety and regulatory requirements. What can this sensing around the car do to help drivers today? And what are the regulations that are coming down? I believe there's a set of regulations in Europe that we're going to talk about to do that. So that's going to be topic 1. Topic 2 is going to be around user experience, not just around sort of driving and safety, but what does it do not just for the driver, but other occupants in the vehicle? And of course, John, you've got an obvious play there, but Gabi and Caroline, you guys do as well. And then we're going to wrap up our sort of 3-module conversation around what this means for kind of the ongoing business model and monetization, right? The auto industry is coming from a place of they charge for the automobile, and then, whether with lease payments and repairs, that's the main financial transaction. And what we're talking about here opens up a bunch of other possibilities and how that's going to work. So that's how we'll wrap this up. So Gabi, let's go to you. And I know each of you has a couple of visuals. Just cue me when you want me to put those up. We're all going to chime in and participate here. But Gabi, let's start with you to get oriented on what's possible.
Yeah, and what I thought we could do is maybe just lay out the landscape around what this interior sensing thing is really all about, right? And how it has evolved from driver monitoring systems. And this actually was really one of the key reasons why SmartEye recently acquired Affectiva, because SmartEye in the automotive space has for many, many years been a leader in delivering driver monitoring systems. And Affectiva, we were basically using similar types of approaches to understanding what's going on beyond just the driver. And then the 2 companies realized, what if we join forces, right? Rather than stay on the path to inevitably compete, what if we actually teamed up to deliver capabilities that go beyond just understanding what's happening with the driver? And if you wouldn't mind bringing up the first slide, maybe we can talk a little bit about driver monitoring. And in SmartEye's case, they deliver driver monitoring using camera systems that are already deployed in vehicles, often on the steering wheel column. SmartEye has AI-based eye tracking software that can understand in greatest detail where exactly the driver is looking. They do face tracking and many other capabilities as well. But essentially what driver monitoring comes down to is understanding states of impairment in a driver. Is the driver distracted by something that they're seeing somewhere on the roadway? Are they distracted because they're using a cell phone? Are they distracted because the kid is having an epic meltdown in the back of the car? Or is the driver getting sleepy? And how can you then detect signs of drowsiness early on so that you can deliver appropriate interventions? And
haven't these showed up in commercial fleet management systems? Isn't that where, and I think of this as maybe on the dash, maybe up in the rear view mirror, but more in commercial systems than in passenger and consumer vehicles, right?
Oh, it's actually being deployed in passenger and consumer vehicles as we speak. Definitely in fleet, it's already there, and mostly as an aftermarket solution, right? And SmartEye has offering in that space as well, where you can basically, let's say, imagine you have a fleet of trucks, delivery trucks, and you want to make sure that also often for liability reasons, your drivers are safe. you are using these technologies already to gather data and get a deeper understanding of what's happening with your drivers. But in the commercial and passenger or the commercial light consumer vehicles today, systems are getting deployed already, mainly driven by regulatory requirements and
I was going to ask, is this, yeah, so can you tell us briefly about where the regulations are showing up and what kind of vehicles?
Yeah, I'll touch on it very briefly, but I'll let Caroline chime in here as well because she's also quite familiar with that landscape. So, for example, in Europe, there's the European New Car Assessment Program, also referred to as Euro NCAP, and it's basically a consumer rating organization. They test and assess vehicles that newly come to market. They test them on how well they adhere to safety requirements, and it's on a 5-star rating scale. And of course, the best rating is 5-star rating. That's what consumers make purchase decisions on, and that's what influences car manufacturers to deliver systems that can guarantee this 5-star rating. And Euro NCAP has declared that vehicles need to include driver monitoring systems. And Caroline, would you like to maybe chime in on that?
Yeah, I mean, you've done such a great job describing the systems, Gabby. I would only add on and say that when people ask why is the camera-based system, why is what we call a direct-based system necessary, right? Versus monitoring the steering wheel, monitoring the lane keeping existing systems in the market today. Why cameras? And the answer is, well, the camera-based systems that Affectiva, now Smart Eye, and Veoneer have been campaigning for, it's predictive. You can predict when somebody is going to be drowsy, going to be impaired, the early signs of distraction versus
rather than
they're drifting out of their lane. At that point, it's too late, right? So
yeah, that's a really, really good point, right? And so now we have these systems in vehicles already and rapidly getting adopted. So in the next I would say 2, 3, 4 years, we're going to see a lot more of these vehicles come to market. Now, these camera-based systems, what if you, I guess pun intended, open the aperture of that camera, right? Like what if you had cameras in the vehicle that not only were directed at the driver, but you used those same sensors, the same technologies to also understand what else is going on in the vehicle? What is happening with the other occupants? What are their interactions? What are their reactions? What are their behaviors? How is that influencing the driver? How is that enabling safety capabilities? But also, how is that improving the experience? And if you then go to the next slide, that is also what Affectiva and Smart Eye combined, what we're going to deliver is this really robust interior sensing platform that basically gives deep understanding of what's going on in the vehicle. Of course, the driver, but also the other occupants, and also the state of the cabin. What is the environment? What are the objects that are in the vehicle? And there's 2 ways that you can slice and dice what this will deliver. On the one hand, these are safety capabilities, but also these user experience capabilities. Of course, driver impairment and catching that early is going to be critical. But also, if you can understand where other occupants are sitting, and is it maybe a child versus an adult, that can influence seatbelt position. It can influence airbag deployment. Is there a child potentially left behind? It's important to detect child seat presence, the presence of a child in a child seat.
Clarification. So we talked about that we're going to go through 3 zones, right? Safety, user experience, and then business model. On the safety line, we know that there's regulatory stuff going on in driver monitoring. Is it also going on in cabin monitoring? Are they insisting on sensors for, say, child left behind and things like that? Or is it primarily in the driver monitoring?
No, absolutely. Definitely. There's been declared intent to start testing against child left behind. Seatbelt has already been part of the equation for a long time. And there's also also here in the US, I believe, legislation pending that is going to require for car manufacturers to deal with issues of child left behind.
So let me bring John in here. And John, on the safety stripe, we're going to talk more about your broader role and user experience, but is is the Bose technology and look at sound. I think you mentioned an example of this already. Are you all feeling the direct impact of any of the regulation stuff yet, or is it opportunistic for this technology?
It's I think a little more opportunistic right now for the suppliers of infotainment systems. There's going to be a need very clearly in the future to work together with companies like Affectiva and Smart Eye and Veoneer to be able to knit all of this sensor output into a warning system that will alert the drivers when these things are happening, right? And there are sort of historically three ways you can warn a driver about something. You can warn them haptically, right? The steering wheel can shake or the seat can vibrate. You can warn visually, right? A heads-up display or a blinking line on a dashboard, or you can warn them audibly with an alert. And we know that there tends to be a much more immediate response to auditory alerts. One of the things that humans are just sort of conditioned to respond to, very quickly. So one of the things that we're trying to do is to be able to use some of our knowledge of psychoacoustics and our ability to render sounds spatially, so that we can ensure that when there's an alert from a blind spot, incursion or a lane departure or even something simple like a park distance sensor, wouldn't it be great if that alert could come from the place where you needed to focus your attention, right? The direction you needed to focus your attention in order to be able to react quickly and minimize that threat. So got to be careful making any claims, obviously, about safety or improved safety. But I think there is a very clear set of green space in here where we can work with the companies that are focusing on the development of this sensing and be able to use the audio system as part of the warning network that makes the drivers aware of things that they need to be aware of.
So I'm keeping my eye on the clock here because time's flying by. So we're going to pull Carolyn in. We're going to go back to these slides briefly, but the intention here is to highlight the user experience because we're talking about that also. So with that context, Caroline, if you can talk to us about the broad range of sensors that are in vehicles or coming very soon that feed both this safety and entertainment thing before we go deep with John on the acoustic environment.
Yeah, thank you, Frank. This is just a visual representation of all of Veoneer's offerings. So, but the biggest thing to take away from this slide is that there's a lot of sensors around the vehicle, right? And more of these, you're starting to see these not on just the fully autonomous vehicles, ones that are being developed to be fully autonomous, but the level 2 autonomous vehicles, the super cruises are starting to have it. More and more regular cars are starting to have front cameras, adaptive cruise control even, right? So these cars are getting smarter and smarter. And the goal of these cars becoming smarter and smarter is to reduce accidents, prevent injuries for the driver and the passengers these days. So where the technology has really been outboard sensing with the different cameras, with radars, with LiDARs, now we're starting to say, okay, we're taking away driver workload. The car is smart. It can start taking over things for the driver. Now let's figure out how much does the driver need to be paying attention, right? How does the driver interact with the car, and how do we play with that push and pull of what is responsible from the driver's side and what is responsible from the vehicle side of things? So take a look at all these sensors, all these dots on the car. Yes, the 5G connectivity is really going to benefit us when we talk about the car orienting itself, communicating with other cars. So that's something that we as Veoneer have been discussing quite a bit. If you can go to the second slide, Frank. So what I kind of alluded to before is we as in Veoneer, we have a very I would say a very interesting way of approaching the problem of cars becoming smarter, not the problem, but the solution of the cars becoming smarter is that start taking off the driver workload of how much the driver needs to be paying attention, then you can start, becoming smarter with how you allocate the driver's attention. So for example, if the driver is in a state or the vehicle's in a state where it's driving itself already to a certain point, maybe the driver doesn't need to pay as much attention. So there's a context part that gets put in here. And to kind of like tie this in, John mentioned that sound is a huge way that people get warned and the car communicates to the driver. we're also seeing now the giant displays in the vehicle, right? You're seeing these big displays that the Cadillacs, the Mercedes, the BMWs have. And that's really a factor of cars becoming more and more able to drive themselves. Now we can offer the driver and the occupants more of this customization experience. The car is now essentially really almost a fancy cell phone, where now it's an entertainment device, right? Where somebody can entertain themselves when Americans are driving so much on the road today and spending so much time in their cars.
Right. So that's a great cue to bring in the acoustic environment with Bose. So let's bring up that screen. And John, help us understand
we
what's
love the
becoming
fact
possible.
that cars are tilting their way towards becoming entertainment devices, because I think maybe, first and foremost, one of the hugest advantages of this persistent high bandwidth connectivity into vehicles that 5G is going to offer is that music is going to sound terrific. It's going to sound even better than it already does, because it will remove a lot of the artifacts that come from streaming, right? So right now, music on satellite radio, whether you're listening to it from a subscription service, as a general rule, that music has been modified. It's been lossily compressed in order to be able to fit through the size of the prevailing pipe. And when the pipe gets bigger, all of those compression artifacts go away. And now, I mean, this slide is alluding to an experience that Bose calls 3DX. It's the ability to be able to add a dimension of height to what you're listening to, in addition to width and depth. And you're going to see, already starting to see in some of the leading streaming services, the ability to be able to stream music in formats that are not just high bandwidth stereo, but are surround sound, right? 5.1 channel discrete surround, 7.1 channel discrete surround, Dolby Atmos, right? ProLogic 2Z. There are a lot of different formats that are prevalent in theater and home cinema that are starting to work their way into the car. And there have been previous attempts to try to do this, but they were always very limited by the ability of media, right? You had to know where to buy DVD audio discs. You had to know where to buy super audio CDs. You had to make sure that your player was compatible with whatever that round shiny disc was that you were trying to play on it. The beauty of having this stuff all be streamed via 5G or whatever the high bandwidth service is that you get instant access to this huge library of material that just sounds amazing if the sound system is capable of rendering it faithfully and giving you the best presentation in terms of spatial and spectral and large signal characteristics.
The rings here suggest that different parts of the car may have different sound experiences?
The rings are actually designed to denote the fact that different speakers provide different levels of exposure to the different types of sounds.
Okay.
So the blue rings are representative of what the contribution is from the perimeter speakers that are mounted in traditional locations, instrument panels, doors, rear shelves. The purple rings are aimed at the contribution of what we call ultra near field speakers. They're speakers that are mounted right in the headrests. That's exactly right. So that you can control the arrival of sounds at your left ear separately from the arrival of sounds at your right ear.
Wow.
Bose was a pioneer in the ultra near field speaker business. We have almost a million of those speakers installed in vehicles worldwide now. So we talked a little bit about that being an antecedent for some of the next generation.
There's almost a million vehicles in the field.
Nope, almost a million speakers. So either 2 speakers or 4 speakers per vehicle. But there are a number of vehicle models out there right now. The Mazda MX-5 Miata, the Nissan Juke, the Nissan Kicks, the Hongqi EHS3 in China. There are vehicles out there that are already starting to use this ultra near field construct to be able to make music sound better. But what we believe,
Okay.
Yeah, I think
so. So over 100,000 vehicles in field with those speakers. Okay.
Many more than 100,000. I said almost a million speakers divided up into either 2 speakers per vehicle or 4 speakers per vehicle, depending on the model, 1 headrest or 2 headrests.
Yeah, front
Where
seat.
we see that going, though, and if you switch to the next slide, I can sort of visualize what that looks like, is once you have those ultra near field speakers in the car and you're capable of controlling that arrival time of sound at your ears independently, you can do some amazing things with spatialization. And not only does that make music sound better, it really gives you a tremendous degree of control over non-music signals. So in this rendering, you can see things like alerts, navigation prompts, VPA interactions, phone calls. All of those can now be rendered anywhere in virtual space where they make the most sense. So they can be rendered close up to you or far away from you. They can be rendered in any azimuth relative to where you're sitting. And that gives you a huge degree of ability to be able to start taking all of that sensor input that you saw in Carolyn's slides, for example, and be able to render it in the places where it makes the most acoustic sense. Because one of the things that we've definitely seen already when we talk to end users, and maybe you've observed this anecdotally, is there tends to be a lot of warning fatigue. People get frustrated because their car is always warning them about stuff. It's always warning me that I'm driving out of my lane. It's always warning me that I'm about to run into things. You would think that's great, right? But what sometimes people do is they just press the button on the panel that shuts that warning off because they
Turn it
don't want
off.
to be exposed to it continuously. And so we view this, we call it aware signal steering, as a way to be able to make some sense of that environment so that you're putting the sounds in the right places. And then I
Gotcha.
guess the next frontier after that, that's also worth talking about a little bit, is the fact that cars are not always driven solo. They're driven with
Yep.
passengers, whether it's a ride sharing situation or whether it's just you
Right.
driving with members of your own family.
Right.
And so if you go to the next slide, I can give you an example of how that works, right? There are all kinds of cases where, for example, the phone rings and the music mutes, right? Because the driver is now taking a phone call. It would be much better. That's the situation that you see on the left-hand side there. It would be much
Yep.
better if we could go to a situation like what you see on the right, where when the phone rings, the music keeps playing for everybody that doesn't need to be part of the phone call, but
Right.
that phone call is routed using those ultra near field speakers just to the driver's seat.
Now, this, to be honest, John, it sounds like a cacophony of sound because suddenly the driver's speakers are blaring a call. Everybody else's speakers are still blowing the music. Doesn't it all clash?
It doesn't, because if you're clever about the way you use signal processing and the way you design the speakers to maximize isolation between the seats, you
Yeah.
can actually start to build what we call a seat-centric environment, where you've got the sounds being rendered to the seats that matter and being actively muted, or some cases even canceled in the seats where
Right.
they don't
Right.
matter.
Wow.
A lot of us went through this during the pandemic, right? You were in a house and all of a sudden you had all four people in your family doing school or doing Zoom or working from home or whatever. The car is like the ultimate open floor plan space, right? There's no separation at all
Nope.
between any of the seats. And so when that separation can't be designed physically, we're working on finding ways to be able to develop it acoustically.
So I'm going to move us. We're running a little long. I'm going to move us to talking about business model and monetization. And so this is jump ball for all of us. We're going to spend a couple of minutes here, and then we're going to wrap up. But consumers are used to the old school model of they buy or lease a car and they pay for repairs unless it's bundled in with the lease. And now we're talking about a bunch of cool features that cost money to keep delivering after the sale of the vehicle, and which sometimes, not always, come with a subscription request attached. So, what are the sort of new opportunities? What's the evolution in marketing and the relationship with the customer? How's all this going to work? Because it sounds cool, but are people going to want to pay for it or give up their privacy or whatever the exchange is going to be? Who wants to grab that one and start? And please all talk at the same time.
I can take a crack at it. I mean, I
All right.
think there's a lot of opportunity here, and we're already seeing examples in the industry where cars are being shipped with features that you then have to activate. Right? There's an OEM
Heard of
that's
that
allowing
in
you to subscribe to seat heaters, for example. So you
right.
buy them in
I've
the
heard
winter when you need them, and then you turn them off in the summer when
Have you
you know
seen examples beyond Tesla? Because I know Tesla has that feature. You got to pay later to turn it on or
Yeah,
subscribe.
I don't quote me on this. I think BMW does it too. So
Ah,
we're seeing a couple of them. Tesla is the innovator and is the one who's sort of leading the charge with his over the air updates. But I think you're seeing other cases where other OEMs are starting to realize that there's value there. The average age of a car on the road in the U.S. is something like 11 years, right? So
there was a
so
headline.
everybody is.
It's bumped up. It's like 13 now. Right.
Well, yeah. So everybody is interested in finding ways to be able to add value to that car that didn't exist when it left. And if
Right.
there's an opportunity to improve safety or communications, both of which tend to factor very, very highly on consumers'
Well,
preferences and market baskets, right, when they're choosing the kinds of things they want to have in their car, I would love, right, to be able to take a 5-year-old car, a 6-year-old car, that I'm handing down to my kids to drive and update it with the latest and greatest
Yeah.
in terms of safety
but
features, so that it would be safer for them than it was when they started.
let me go out to the crazy extreme, which was, you know, and I don't think this will happen, but it's just the extreme, which is I don't have to pay for transportation, right? There's monetization off advertising to me, and the trip's free. We're not going to get that radical, are we, Caroline or Gabi?
Well, why not? I mean, data monetization is kind of a dirty language, right? Like, and user data is very personal, and data privacy needs to be very much considered here. But imagine this scenario. What if I, let's say, have a family car, and I as a family accept that some of my data will be shared, and in return, I get advertising that's personalized to me. If that actually helps make my experience better and more relevant, then maybe I'm okay with that, right? Maybe if I am taking the car out to go shopping, and it then offers up discounts or coupons for the places I go to, or it routes me to the playground for the kids that are unruly because it can sense that the kids need to get out of the car and they need a break, and the car directs me there. And then, by the way, oh, there's whatever, a lunch place around the corner, and here's a special offer for you. Maybe as a consumer, I would be open to that.
Right.
But I do think it needs to be treated with a lot more transparency than there is today on what sensors really do and what data is collected and who owns that data. So tremendous amount of improvement still needed, but I think we need to be open to that.
But Caroline, what are you hearing at Veoneer?
Yeah, I mean, we take data privacy very seriously, both when we collect data, we have, we anonymize everything, we store everything, not the pictures of people, but the actual just facial landmarks of people. So it is something that we take extremely seriously. However, I do think that moving forward, technology has already gotten there in a lot of, I know GM vehicles, I know John mentioned a couple other OEMs, you can order coffee in the morning, you can order your lunch, it knows your route of how you're going to work anymore, and you stop by this Starbucks. So I think that progression has already started. And most OEMs do have a data monetization team and group already. It's just, will we get to the future where all our transportation is free because our data is that valuable? I guess we'll see.
Or discounted. Huh. Well, any last thoughts or comments for the audience? We've sort of expanded the landscape quite a bit here from what I was expecting way back at the beginning when I started planning this panel. So what did we miss? What do you want to add on? Anything?
I guess maybe one thing I would throw out there is that there is going to need to be probably an overhaul of the way that the user interface works inside vehicles to be able to manage all of this stuff. We've done some market testing, some end user testing, and a lot of those sort of advanced sound features I was describing, seat-centric experiences and muting volume in different seats and things like that are valuable, but they're only valuable to end users if those features are easy to access. So you need to think about sort of getting rid of it. For audio, it's the old bass treble balance fader. You kind of got to get rid of that old paradigm and start thinking about new ways to be able to have these experiences easily accessible. And as you move around and have people in different seats, you may actually need to think about decentralizing that experience, right? When you get to the point where the vehicles are driving autonomously, there may not be such thing as a driver's seat anymore. And so you need to be able to get to that stuff from anywhere in the cabin.
Wow.
Yeah, that's so interesting.
Caroline or Gabi?
Yeah, I wanted to maybe build on something you said in that regard, right? I think we also need to rethink really the almost antiquated models of how cars are being sold and how capabilities are explained to consumers, right? Now that you're using all these really complex AI systems and these hyper advanced sensors, and you're collecting data on consumers, right? People are going to need to understand what's going on. You have to explain it. And I just have such a great example. It was a coworker of mine who a couple of years ago went out to buy a luxury SUV, and at the dealer, she's checking out this car. She sees there's a sensor in the roof, a camera. She's like, hey, what is this? She knows what it is, but she's asking the salesperson, couldn't explain what it was. And so here you are buying a car. It's got a camera. Is this a safety system? What happens when I put a sticky note over that? Am I now going to disable something critical? Or are you, OEM, actually capturing data on me? Where is that data going? Who's using that, right? And there's no understanding. So we need to be hyper-focused on data privacy, as Caroline just pointed out. And we need to focus on transparency and clarity so we can explain what is really happening in these hyper-connected vehicles.
Yeah.
Fine.
Yeah, I mean, my comment would only be that as people are buying cars, like Gabby and John mentioned, it's actually very hard. We discuss in the industry all the time how to get people to buy safety features. When they buy cars, they're buying the new cool features that are the more customization and the shiny features. But regulation is very important on getting the safety features in the cars. So the same work that's been happening in Europe, we should accelerate that here in the US too and bring these features to market faster.
And safety isn't just seatbelts and airbags, right? It's safety is now things that actively prevent you from getting into accidents.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Minimize the damage when you do.
With
And
the
that's
active
huge.
assistance.
yeah, absolutely.
Well, I want to thank our audience for joining us. We're planning a small in-person event this fall as things resume, and then we will resume the regular in-person event next March. So please check out all the other recordings from this June digital edition of Connected Things 2021. And thanks so much to our panelists, Caroline, Gabi, and John, for joining us today. We really appreciate it.